it is of no moment in this impeachment trial with respect to confidential funds.
Because
It is allowed. And in confidential funds, usually, inaalaw nila yung aliases.
dati kasi in the past, Vice Presidents Noli De Castro and Jejo Marbinay also had confidential funds. The fact is, meron pa rin confidential funds in the past.
Sa ngayon, it's really a challenge, Attorney Karen, for the prosecution because number one, the evidence so far presented by the prosecution are all preliminaries. Pwede pang i-appeal ang dalawang notices of disallowances. Hindi pa siya final and executory. At pangalawa, yung so far na present ng prosecution are based on paper audit. They're just confined sa documentation.
Yeah.
And based on that, it's so difficult to prove fraud or misuse of confidential funds.
At yun nga no mga kabayan, wala na pong paligoy-ligoy pa, maikling intro lamang po dito sa video na ating pong panonoorin. Patungkol nga po sa yung mga inilabas na ebidensya, pakikipagsabuatan ng COA sa mga prosecution na lawyers dito kila Kapunan na para ba talagang iniipit si VP Inday Sara, magpasa hanggang ngayon, wala pa rin daw pong napapatunayan na talagang nagnakaw o merong misuse na ginawa doon sa mga confidential funds. Yan nga po yung ating panonoorin mga kabayan. At kung bago ka pa nga lang sa akin channel, huwag mo kang kalimutang i-hit like at subscribe button at yung ating membership mga kabayan, yung link nasa description na para updated ka sa mga uploads ko araw-araw. 39 pesos lang yan mga kabayan ha. At yun nga, magkita-kita tayo dyan sa ating membership page. At wala na nga pong paligoy-ligoy pa. Panoorin na nga po natin yung balita patungkol nga po dyan.
Good morning, Attorney Neil.
Good morning, Attorney Karen.
Okay, let's start with the impeachment trial, Wednesday's impeachment trial, where prosecution witness Sailin Del Campo of the Commission on Audits said that it's not part of the mandate of the Office of the Vice President nor of the DepEd to have confidential operations. So hindi daw usual na may confidential funds. But President Bongbong Marcos' offices approved the release of 125 million pesos in confidential funds to the Office of the Vice President in 2022. So what is the effect of that on this ground as an impeachment ground, impeachable offense against Vice President Sara?
With respect to the statement of the auditor Del Campo, I think based on the Constitution, the mandate of COA is post-audit. So with respect to policy issues, hindi COA eh. Ang policy, the mere fact that it was approved by the President, then that's the policy issue. Na the fact is nagkaroon ng confidential funds ang Office of the Vice President and the Department of Education. So I think yung authority ni State Auditor Del Campo would just be confined dun sa post-audit niya.
Post-audit, meaning
Not
whether,
the policy issue.
of
of
whether it's a policy na may confidential
Yes.
funds ng OVP or DepEd, it's beyond what COA
It's beyond
can
her pay grade
to state ano
to
dapat ang
state
policy.
the policy on confidential
Okay,
funds.
so dati kasi in the past, Vice Presidents Noli De Castro and Jejo Marbinay also had confidential funds of 6 million pesos per year. Ang laki na pag-iwanan na ng panahon, no? 6 million pesos dati. Pero the fact is, meron pa rin confidential funds in the past. So would that affect the prosecution's case to say that yung pagkakaroon ng confidential funds ng OVP at DepEd ay impeachable offense?
The issue here is not pagkakaroon ng confidential funds. No. The issue is misuse or misappropriation of the confidential funds. And that's what the prosecution is trying to prove in the last 3 weeks of the trial. And sa ngayon, it's really a challenge, Attorney Karen, for the prosecution because number one, the evidence so far presented by the prosecution are all preliminaries. Pwede pang i-appeal ang dalawang notices of disallowances. Hindi pa siya final and executory. At pangalawa, yung so far na present ng prosecution are based on paper audit. they're just confined sa documentation.
Yeah.
And based on that, it's so difficult to prove fraud or misuse of confidential funds.
Okay, and you raise a good point, Attorney Neil, because doon nga sa testimony ni COA Auditor Sailin Del Campo, nung tinanong siya about the notices of disallowance, even Senator Erwin Tulfo asked magkano ba yung hindi pa nasusole ng OVP at DepEd, ang sinabi niya, hindi pa final yung notices of disallowance at meron ngang isang disallowance na dininay na nila, meaning kinonfirm nila yung denial, and yet it's pending motion for reconsideration with the COA. So hindi pa raw final. What is the significance of available remedies to the OVP and DepEd, meaning hindi pa siya final disallowance notice to OVP and DepEd? Ano yung significance nun on having misuse of confidential funds as an impeachable ground against the Vice President?
Well, ang significance nun is meron pang remedies available to the Vice President. And pwede exhaust ito ng Office of the Vice President, meaning wala pang conclusive finding. And that is a challenge. That's the challenge that I'm
Kung
saying.
wala pang conclusive finding, would you say that it was premature for the prosecution to use the misuse of confidential funds as a ground for impeachment? Meaning, they could have chosen to wait until natapos yung proseso sa COA before they use this as an impeachable ground. Or if they needed to file the impeachment complaint already, then wag na lang sana isama itong misuse of confidential funds. What's your take on this on a legal standpoint?
That would be ideal pag final executory. But I think it's too early to tell also. Kasi hindi pa tapos yung presentation of the prosecution. And what we are waiting here in this Article 1 confidential fund to be a solid ground for impeachment is they should go beyond the documentation. They should, what we're waiting are witnesses that would positively identify the alleged misuse of public funds.
Oh, so like you said, hindi issue na may confidential funds because that's a policy matter, but it's the misuse.
Yes.
And ang shortcoming or siguro limitation ng COA is that based on their mandate, they're only limited to post-audit within the bounds of the documents presented to them. So ang inaantay natin is for a witness to say na alam ko kung saan ginamit yan at hindi yan napunta dun sa sinasabi nilang whatever they're alleging sa documentation na paggamit sa confidential funds, it's not there na napunta.
Problem lang doon is it was admitted by COA that theirs is only compliance audit. So alam naman natin ang compliance audit, lahat ng mga liquidation and documentation lang. And it's not fraud audit. Like ang nangyayari dun sa mga fertilizers, etc. It was fraud audit eh. And if fraud audit, pumupunta yung audit team sa field.
Oo, to inspect.
To
Doon ba
inspect
napunta yung pera?
Yung
Nandyan
pera ba,
Oo.
nandyan ba?
Yeah.
May natanggap ba? So this is the limitation now. So I think, paano magiging creative and resourceful ang prosecution to present witnesses?
Oo. Well, yun yung ine-expect ko na may pasabog sila, that there would be a witness who would say that I was there, alam ko kung saan dinisburse yung pera at hindi yan napunta sa confidential operations.
Correct. Unless siguro may pasabog sila, ang prosecution, that would make this Article 1 confidential funds a solid ground for impeachment. Baka it's difficult to give rise to an impeachable
At this
offense.
stage.
At this stage.
But based on what we're seeing so far.
But we're still
Yeah.
waiting. And I just want to clarify yung statement ko kanina sa COA with respect to Auditor Del Campo. Just want to clarify na it's within the mandate of COA and Del Campo and Auditor Del Campo to post-audit, to conduct a post-audit on confidential funds. But it is just above her pay grade to state the policy
as to whether
meron
dapat
any
or
agency
walang-
should be given
confidential. And in
funds.
fact, there are calls by civil society groups na ibawal na yung confidential funds sa mga ibang offices outside of defense or even the Office of the President, sinasabi nilang iba na dapat wala ring confidential funds yan. So, like you said, it's a matter of policy that should be determined, but it is outside of COA's mandate to determine that policy.
And just to make it sure, ako personally ayoko ng confidential funds outside of really yung Department of Defense and other agencies directly connected to national security.
Well, one of the things that gave rise to a red flag dito sa paggamit ng confidential funds ng Office of the Vice President ay yung mga aliases.
Yes.
And Senator Bam Aquino asked whether the use of aliases is prohibited by law. But COA auditor Sailin Del Campo said that in that joint circular ay walang express prohibition on the use of aliases. What is the impact of that statement on the strength of the prosecution's case? Attorney Neil, when Senator Bam Aquino raised the issue on aliases, the use of aliases dun sa paggamit ng confidential funds, COA auditor Sailin Del Campo said that the joint circular does not expressly prohibit the use of aliases. So, ano ba yung effect ng ganong testimony doon sa strength of the prosecution's case to show na may misuse of confidential funds nung naglabasan yung list ng mga nakatanggap supposedly at napakadaming aliases doon, mukhang maraming aliases yung Mary Grace Piatos, Quezon, kung ano-anong mga pangalan na parang fictitious.
Well, remember yesterday, sabi ni presiding officer dun sa prosecution lawyer na you had so much fun with respect to dun sa mga names na nakakatawa. And the prosecution, they malaking oras rin ang binigay nila dun sa mga nakakatawang fictitious names na ito, na aliases. Pero remember, Attorney Karen, never flinag ng COA.
Oo nga.
On the basis of fictitious or aliases. So hindi nila disallow or prohibit yung use of aliases in the use of confidential funds. Ang flinag nila is, for example, hindi yung si Mary Grace Piatos. Ang flinag nila is yung lack of proof of success. Bakit may binigyan ng award or reward si Mary Grace Piatos. So, the issue is not aliases. It is of no moment in this impeachment trial with respect to confidential funds.
Because there's no express prohibition in the
And we know
joint
if there's no
circulars.
express prohibition, unless it's mala en se, it is allowed. And in confidential funds, usually, inaalaw nila yung aliases.
Well, totoo naman po yung sinasabi ni Atty. Neil, no, mga kabayan, na talaga magpasa hanggang ngayon, wala pa rin naman po silang napapakita na ang ating VP Inday Sara, ginawang o nag-misuse ng mga confidential funds. 'Di ba? Hindi nila mapakita, dinakaw ba? Wala naman. 'Di ba? Ang ginagawa po nila kasi ngayon, nagkakapital sila doon sa mainstream media upang siraan si VP Inday Sara. Ang layunin naman po ng mga to siraan si VP Inday. Kahit wala po silang ebidensya, pansinin niyo yung mga lengguwahe ni Kapunan. 'Di ba? Talagang pinapalabas niya yung ng opisina ni VP Inday, mga kawatan. Di ba? Kahit na-strike off mo yon, pinapa-strike na, kahit ma-strike yun mga kabayan, syempre, kinukuha na po yan ng mainstream media, ibabalita na. Di ba? Kahit strike off yon doon sa Senate hearing, doon sa impeachment hearing. Ganun po yung kanilang ginagawa mga kabayan. Maging matalino po tayo. Huwag po tayo padadala sa mga salita nito nila Kapunan na sila Piatos, sila ganito. Di ba? Alias nga po yun . Pag sinabing alias, ang tawag sa alias? Pen name. Di ba? Parang sila Rizal. Parang sila Emilio Jacinto nun, di ba? Gumagamit ng mga pen name. Di ba? Para hindi po sila matunton nung mga kalaban nila. Kaya nga confidential . Yun po yung dahilan nun, mga kabayan.
So to clarify, hindi siya by itself proof na may misuse of confidential funds na gumamit ng aliases,
No.
yung OVP. Okay.
No, use of aliases does not follow that there is already a misuse of funds.
So what would the prosecution have to do to show na mayroong fraud related dito sa paggamit ng aliases?
Well, kung ako ang prosecution, nakataka-prepare ako, for example, in 2 years sa case na to, titingnan ko yung tao mismo i-present ko. Kung may ma-present ako dun sa mga tao, let's say hindi siya fictitious, tapos present ko siya, at siya mismo magsasabi na hindi ko natanggap yung perang yun. That is, of course, a positive, direct evidence na ginamit yung pera sa ibang bagay at may misuse. Pero for you to just rely on documentation and in an impeachment trial watched by millions of Filipinos, I think medyo challenging talaga sa prosecution.
Pero paano nila gagawin yun? With respect to balancing that with allegations or any claims by the defense that kaya sila gumamit ng aliases is to protect the identity of their informants or assets. So that they can't point to the real person behind the alias. How does the impeachment court balance that type of interest of protecting the identities of real informants or assets and the prosecution's need to show someone that will say that either that's really me, ako yung Mary Grace Piatos, or sasabihin nila na hindi totoo yan dahil wala talagang Mary Grace Piatos at napunta yan talaga kay VP Sara?
At this time of the trial in Article 1, so wala pa tayong na-establish or nakikita na conclusive na misuse. Even assuming na it will remain as it is, and kung ako ang defense, because this is an impeachment case, at least I have to show na may tao nga behind kay Mary Grace Piatos. Not all of them. Probably I can show a couple or some, just to show na meron talagang tao.
So for the defense, it would help their case to show or present someone who will admit to the person behind the alias and say that the money went to him or natanggap niya talaga.
Even without a conclusive proof. Because we're not in the court of law. We are in impeachment court where our audience is the public.
Okay. So mahirap pala talaga itong ground na to, no?
Kaya nga sinabi ko, Attorney Karen, because of the son of the President 2025, na binulgar niya itong mga trillions and billions of corruption, yung threshold sa impeachment tumaas kasi, for me. Kasi palapit yung election, yung threshold. That's why
So you mean yung threshold is to overcome yung public perception na mas may malaking corruption sa flood control?
Kailangan kung prosecution ka, you have to present yung at least in the same magnitude na ginagawa or allegations against the congressmen, against the DPW's officials, against the senators. Para maging impeachable ito, ang tingin ko, yun ang inintay ng publiko.
Oo, ikakalabas lang sa news yung recent testimony ni former DPWH Secretary Manuel Bonoan in the Sandigan Bayan saying that sa senators merong tigpa 500 million pesos minimum na fund daw for their own priority projects. How does that type of testimony impact yung gravitas or credibility ng Senate sitting as an impeachment court?
Well, I think it's very clear na even before lumabas yung statement ni Secretary Bonoan, I'm sure na affected na rin yung credibility ng Senate and the House of Representatives. And that what makes this impeachment so challenging for the prosecution, not to mention the very difficult 16-vote threshold. So, ang credibility nila because of the massive allegations are already affected. Hindi natin pwede i-compare sa corona impeachment. Malayong-malayo.
Iba-iba yung situation
The situation
in the past.
is so different. The composition of the Senate was so different. The defense counsel or spokesperson different. And ito, ibang-iba ito. It's so challenging for the prosecution. That's why, ang hinihintay natin dito, yung pasabog na sinasabi mo. And for me, I think ang chance dito ng prosecution, kung magpapatuloy itong Article 1, I hope meron na pasabog. Pero kung wala, I don't think it would give rise to an impeachable offense. Pero ang chance na dito, Attorney Karen, yung isang article na lang. Which is unexplained wealth. Kasi baka marami sila doong documentation. Doon, kahit sa documentation, pwede mo i-prove. Or pwede kang pwede mo yung i-present.
Okay. And merong naging statement din si COA Auditor Sailin Del Campo that it is possible na mag-initiate ng fraud investigation yung COA in relation to dun sa aliases. Kung mag-initiate sila ng sarili nilang fraud investigation, is that a ground to say na premature pa itong misuse of confidential funds as a ground for among the articles of impeachment that have already been filed?
I think they won't do that. Kasi pag ginawa nila yon, papakita lang talaga na preliminaries lang ito. And it won't help the
Parang
case of the
magiging prejudicial
prosecution.
question pa yung ongoing fraud
Yes.
investigation ng COA to the
Baka
impeachment.
makasama pa siya. Dahil preliminaries pa lang ito eh.
Oo. So,
And,
it won't help the case of the prosecution.
it won't help the case. Kung mag-fraud at this time.
Oo, yung COA. Okay. And what about the cases filed by the DOJ, yung grave threats against Vice President Sara? They filed already in court?
Yeah.
So would that be a prejudicial question dun sa Article 4 on grave threats that have been filed in the impeachment against
Definitely
VP Sara?
not. Impeachment is a different proceeding. But if it were filed, for example, before the articles of impeachment were filed, siguro yung purely evidentiary sa criminal, makakatulong yon. A little weight. Pero ngayon kasi, after presentation na, I don't think it will have an effect in this impeachment trial.
And Attorney Neil, since you mentioned na ibang-iba yung corona impeachment with this VP Sara impeachment, yung isang agaw eksena in day 15 of the impeachment trial is yung bangayan between the prosecution and defense counsels. There were statements made by prosecution lawyer Attorney Kapunan that I was reading some of the comments, sabi ng iba, condescending daw dun naman sa defense lawyer Attorney Ferrer. To what extent should the presiding officer handle yung mga ganitong types of exchange between the counsels? Kasi nung time natin with Enrile, walang ganyan because you had retired Justice Cuevas sa defense na
Wala ganyan.
marami naman doon sa prosecution naging estudyante niya. Parang he
Yes.
had this big moral ascendancy.
Yes.
Kumbaga siya yung pinaka-senior doon, di ba? So, what can Senator Cheese Escudero do?
Well, first of all, Senator Cheese Escudero is doing very well. Pero in terms of, let's say, controlling the decorum between councils and among councils, I think he should be more stricter.
Dapat ba siya mag-threat ng contempt pagka merong mga
kailangan
snide
siguro-
remarks?
Well, kasi ang side remarks naman, yung mga nangyari kahapon, it won't naman help the case of the prosecution. Ang ginawa ng defense doon, yung theatrical acts ng defense and the prosecution, it won't help their cases.
It won't help their clients. Oo.
It won't help their clients, it won't help their cases. So dapat talaga more stricter ngayon in terms of decorum si presiding officer. Pero yung theatrical na yon, for entertainment purposes, baka mayroong purpose lang kasi masyadong boring eh. Masyadong boring, nakatulog na yung mga tao sa
Oo, so,
trial.
at least
Nakatulog na.
merong
At least may konting entertainment.
Oo. And then, yung nagkaroon ng statement si presiding officer, Senator Cheese Escudero, that they will revisit their rules. And again, he was emphasizing na dapat ang mga spokespersons hindi maging counsels. Meaning, if you're part of the defense or prosecution lawyers, you can't be a spokesperson as well. Do you think that's a wise rule?
Kasi nga, lenient siya. Pero you were a spokesperson before sa corona. And yung prohibition sa amin, prohibition rin sa inyo yun eh.
Oo,
All
but
of us.
I remember entering my appearance also in the defense team. So
Yes.
that time, tatlo kaming eventually naging spokespersons. We were also part of the defense team. So
Pero I
walang
think-
masama kung simultaneous
Wala
yung
masama.
role. Oo.
Wala masama. Pero I think kahit spokesperson ka, you have some responsibility to the impeachment court, di ba?
You can't be posting. So tama lang yung sinabi niya na bawal mag-post ng mga anything that will affect the integrity of the
Siyempre.
proceedings and the
I
court.
agree with him. And in fact, si Enrile was sobrang mas stricto pa yun. During our time, talagang parang korte na yun eh. Sobra pa ata.
Yeah. And so far, what can you say about the pace of the trial? And ano room for improvement?
Kaya mabagal, masyadong mabagal, no? Ang trial. So for the prosecution, pag mabagal ang trial, this is not good for the prosecution. So I think they have to, just like Article 4, they have to find ways na na medyo bilisan nila ito at makaproceed na sila dun sa Article 2, which I think is, kung presented properly and with solid evidence, I think yun ang winnable for the prosecution.
Article 2, which is unexplained well.
Yes.
Thank
Yun
you.
yung tingin ko yung may possibility.
Okay, thank you again, Attorney Neil Tupas. At wag sana kayo magsawa. We'll continue to ask you to comment as this trial proceeds.
Thank you, Attorney Karen.
The testimony of state auditors is putting the rules on
At bilang panghuli mga kabayan, talagang napatunayan po natin dito na ito po sila rin. Sila, yung mga congressman po dyan, sila Luistro, sila De Lima, sila Chel Jokno, talagang gumagawa lang ng paraan para sirain si BP Inday Sara para sa nalalapit na eleksyon sa 2028. Kahit ano pong paninira ang gawin po ninyo, siraan nyo man lahat ng mga malalapit kay BP Inday, siraan nyo man lahat yung mga nagtataguyod ng tama at maayos na batas sa ating bansa, di ba, isipin na lang ninyo, pati INC sinisiraan ninyo na gusto lamang, maging maayos ang bansa natin. Pero ano pong ginagawa ninyo? Di ba? Nag-rally, siniraan ninyo, sasabihan pa ninyo na sana umulan ng dinuguan. Tama ba yun? O, kita nyo nangyayari sa atin ngayon, binabaha kayo ngayon. Sa mga nanlalait nun, sa rally ng INC, deserve niyo yan, lumangoy kayo sa baha. Di ba? O, ganyan na lang po muna mga kabayan, hanggang sa muli. Paalam.